I have served the Thessal throne for 41 years, long enough to bury a king, crown a queen, and watch that queen's court try to bury her marriage before it had even begun. So when I tell you I did not expect much from the man they gave her, understand that I had seen worse arranged, and I had seen none arrive with less ceremony. He came through the lower gate, not the high one. No honor guard met him. He carried his own single case up the switchback stairs of the area of Vantar, sweating in the thin mountain air like any tired traveler, while the court watched from the colonnade and did not bother to lower their voices. "A courier," Lord Vashon said, loud enough to carry. "The Earth Concord sent us a courier to marry our queen." His name was Emory Voss. The treaty papers called him a logistics attaché, third class, and I confess I believed the papers, same as everyone else. The HFY war had cost both our peoples too much to refuse the peace the humans offered, and the peace required a marriage, Queen Mariah Thessal, to whichever man Earth judged suitable to stand beside her, and prove the alliance was more than ink. They sent us Emory Voss, quiet, unremarkable, 40 years old with gray already at his temples, and the court decided within the hour that he was an insult dressed as a diplomat. Mariah did not decide anything within the hour. She simply endured him, the way she endured most things that came from outside her control, with a stillness in her gray slate face that told you nothing, storm blue eyes fixed somewhere past your shoulder. I had raised her from a girl. I knew that stillness was not peace. It was the shape grief takes when a queen is not permitted to show it. For 6 months I watched him take the court's contempt and set it down gently, the way you'd set down something breakable that wasn't yours to break. They gave him the smallest apartments in the East Wing. He said nothing, and hung his one spare coat on a nail. They sat him at the foot of the banquet table, below the stable master. He asked the stable master about his horses, and meant it. They called him the cargo runner to his face at the autumn Accord, and he only refilled Lord Vashon's cup and said he'd carried worse cargo than insults, and it had never once slowed the ship down. He never once raised his voice to her. That was the thing I noted, keeping my ledgers in the corner the way old stewards do, watching more than anyone credits us for watching. He asked her questions about her people and listened to the answers as though they mattered more than his own comfort. He learned to fold his hands the Sarathi way at table, wrists crossed. A gesture of deference few outsiders bother to learn correctly. Small things. He built no case for himself. He simply kept treating her like a queen worth serving, long after the court had stopped extending her that courtesy behind closed doors, whispering that a dominion built on grief and rationing had been handed a nothing man for a nothing marriage. I remember a morning in late winter, when the kitchens ran short, and the household staff went without their second meal, so the visiting Concord delegation could be fed a proper welcome. Emory Voss noticed before I did. He carried his own tray down to the scullery and split it 3 ways among the youngest staff without a word to anyone, and when Lord Vashon made a joke of it at the evening table, "Our courier feeds the help, how democratic." Voss only said that where he came from, a man who let people go hungry in his own house wasn't fit to be called a guest in it, let alone a husband. The scullery staff did not forget that. Neither, I noticed, did the queen, though she said nothing at the time, and only turned her wineglass once, slowly, the way she did when she was working to keep her face still. He was patient in the way that unremarkable men are rarely credited for being. When the court mocked his plain gray coat, he did not buy a finer one. When they mocked his silence at the high table, he did not learn to perform their wit. He simply went on carrying his own case up the switchback stairs each time he returned from the border posts he was assigned to inspect. A diplomatic courtesy tour, the treaty called it, though I would later understand it as something else entirely. And each time, the queen watched him climb from her window a little longer than the time before. I do not think she loved him yet, in those months. I think she had simply stopped flinching when he entered a room. For a woman raised to expect every entrance to cost her something, that is its own kind of beginning. Then came the night of the Accord Gala, when the Voth remnant proved the peace had enemies who preferred the war. They came up through the old cistern tunnels beneath the Eyrie, 11 of them, masked, armed with confiscated Concord rifles they'd stripped from a supply raid 3 months prior. The same raid, I would later learn, that Emory Voss had been quietly investigating under a name that was not his own. They meant to kill the queen at the height of the gala, in front of every noble house and the assembled Concord delegation, and let the alliance die of the wound. The lights went first, then the screaming, and under it, gunfire that none of our ceremonial guard had ever heard outside a training range. I was 3 steps from Mariah when Emory Voss put his own body between her and the doorway, and I understood, in the space of one drawn breath, that the man who had spent 6 months being mocked for carrying his own luggage had never once needed anyone to carry it for him. He moved like something that had been waiting a long time to stop pretending. He put down 2 of the remnant before I had finished falling to the floor beside the queen, disarmed a third with his bare hands hard enough that I heard the bone, and took a graze across his ribs that would have folded a lesser man and barely slowed his stride. He got Mariah behind a stone pillar and stayed in front of it, breathing hard, blood soaking through the same gray coat they had mocked him for wearing to every formal dinner, because he owned no other, and he held that doorway alone until what remained of the household guard finally found their courage and their footing. When it was over, 8 of the remnant were dead or taken, and Emory Voss was on one knee against the pillar with his hand pressed to his side, and Mariah Thessel, my queen, who had not shown an unguarded face to this court in 11 years, knelt in the wreckage of her own gala in a gown meant for dancing, and put both hands to his jaw and made him look at her. "Who are you?" she said. "Not a question, not really. An accounting." "Still the man who carries your bags," he told her, and even bleeding, even shaking, he almost smiled saying it. Lord Vashon was the one who found the mark under the torn shoulder of his shirt, a small, faded insignia, Concord Special Operations, the kind of unit that does not appear on treaty papers because its members are not supposed to exist on treaty papers at all. I watched the color leave Vashon's face as thoroughly as it had once colored his mockery. I will tell you what I did not expect. Of all the things that night, I did not expect the silence that followed. No proclamation, no announcement to the gathered houses, no crown lowered onto his head for the cameras of the visiting delegation. Mariah would not have it, and if you knew her, you would understand why. She had spent her whole reign being made into a spectacle for other people's politics, and she was not going to let his worth become one more performance for the court to consume and then forget. She simply sat beside his cot in the infirmary that night, and every night after, until the ribs healed, and she did not ask the physicians to leave when I came to check on them both, because by then she no longer needed a witness's discretion. She needed a witness who already knew. I was that witness, so I can tell you that on the 7th night, when he woke from a fevered half-sleep and reached for her hand before he'd fully opened his eyes, as though some part of him had already learned that she would be there, she did not pull away. She held on, and she looked at me across the small lamplit room, and she said the only thing she ever said to me about it, before or since. "So this," she said quietly, "is what I married. I have served this throne 41 years. I have seen kings crowned in gold, and grief buried in silence, and treaties signed in blood no one wanted to spill. I had never, until that season, seen a court's contempt curdle so completely into something that looked, in the end, very much like awe, quiet, unannounced, and entirely earned. They still call him the cargo runner, in the corridors, when they think no one of consequence is listening. They only say it now, with their eyes down,